Hi, I'm Nicole, and it's great to be here with you today. Welcome to Kingston Standard Church, our online version. If you're in the Kingston area, I'd love to invite you to connect with us in person. However, if you are limited to connecting with us here online, we're so glad we can walk together as we discover and follow Jesus in this setting. And whether you join us in person or online, be sure to check out our website at kschurch.ca. The link's in the description below. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube and like us on Facebook, so you have the inside scoop on new posts, content, and connections. And if you want to reach us with any prayer requests or questions, you can send us a message on Facebook or email our church office, and that email address is on the screen. Now, whether you're connecting here with us for the first time, or if you're returning to our channel, we have a variety of resources that are available for families on both YouTube and Facebook. Part of our mission as a church is to equip parents for conversations that help families follow Jesus together. Our goal is to connect the weekly themes and scriptures in a way that fosters meaningful family discussions and encourages questions about faith. Check out the link in the description below for our Kingston Standard Church Cabin Kids channel. Or if you're with us on Facebook, we share content there as well. To discover more interactive resources for kids and families every week of the year. You should seriously check it out. Thanks again for tuning into this video. Let's see what God has in store for us today.
So there's this running line in our home. Did you ask someone? It comes from the times I've gone to the store for something in particular. It's a specific item, and I'll do my search, I'll circle the aisles, I'll scan the shelves. Sometimes I'm just convinced it's just not there. And there have been times I've left the store without it, and my wife will go to the same store and she'll find it without any problem. I think they stock the shelves after I leave. But that's where I realize sometimes my shopping skills might need a bit of a tune-up. So the question becomes, did you ask someone if they had it? Now sometimes, for whatever reason, I choose to call my wife. And I think there's a lot of guys that when they can't find stuff in a store, they've oftentimes called their wives. But most times now I will ask. And I'll admit, there have been times when I've passed by that item that I've been looking for several times, and I probably looked right at it, and I still didn't notice it. So now, if I come home empty-handed, even if I've asked someone, maybe we know what really happened. I might have been close enough to see it, but maybe not paying enough attention to notice. Now, it's easy for all of us to be finding ourselves in that kind of a place, right? We buzz through so much of our lives and we miss things. You can imagine how often the police hear a statement like, "I didn't realize the speed had changed." Or as a pastor, there's oftentimes after announcing things multiple times and having it in many places, people will say, "I didn't know that was happening." Or accidents are often followed by, like, "I didn't even see that car coming." Sometimes, we don't see things because maybe we're not looking for them. No matter how observant we may feel we are, we can still end up missing things. And sometimes it's because, we're distracted, or like I said, we're not looking for them. Sometimes we're maybe even looking right at them and it's not even registering in our minds. And today, as we look at this account of Jesus, he's going to help us pick up on something that a lot of people completely overlooked. You see, Jesus is sharing here the way the kingdom works. And we've been talking about how he takes us beyond nice, beyond ourselves. And he takes us into loving God with all of what we are and loving our neighbor as ourselves. And so as he's sharing this with people in his day, you can imagine how the stories are starting to kind of wrangle people and move them beyond their comfort zone. And some people, as we read, they get critical. And there are others that they're at least curious. They want to know what's going on, but they aren't fully committed. And then there are those who are quietly or even overtly committed. And his activity, right, it challenges assumptions, it changes perceptions and perspectives, generally just stirring a lot of things up for people. Now, Jesus, we see over and over again him getting up close and personal with people. He spends time with people who are among the notorious. And he spends time, some, with people who are among the sanctimonious, for that matter, and everyone in between. And so as we step into this account, we see how Jesus changes someone's life for the better. And we get to see how he helps this man, really take the image that he has of himself, and Jesus turns it right side up. But to do that, he goes far beyond any of the labels that have been sticking to this guy in his culture. Let's catch up with him in Luke chapter 19. We're going to start reading at verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. And he tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. Now, Zacchaeus may be very familiar to you or not, but as a tax collector, he had been established by the Roman occupation as a collaborator, a traitor in the eyes of his own people. A tool used to fund the occupation was the taxes, and they siphoned the wealth in order to enrich Caesar, and as a result, he would have been tremendously hated by local people. All accounts of these folks refer to, tax collectors in a whole other category of people. They're a special category of sinners. There's sinners, and then there's tax collectors and everyone else. Zacchaeus had made his money from charging more than what Rome was actually demanding, and he kept the difference, and he must have been good at it because, as we just read, he wasn't just any old tax collector anymore. He was the chief tax collector for the region, and he had become very rich. But if you think about it, Zacchaeus is stuck. For a guy like Zacchaeus, doing life probably got to the place where most of it was him alone, and that was pretty normal because he was a special kind of sinner, right? I mean, he was despised day in and day out, oftentimes probably by people who had maybe at one time been his friends or even his family. Verse 5 continues, when Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and he called him by name. And that's interesting. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. So here's Zacchaeus, hated by the community, with very few social connections or options anymore. I mean, Jesus really, he could have said, come on down, let's get your life sorted out. Or come on down, you know what the law says. We need to get this cleaned up. But he just named him. Zacchaeus was well aware of all the things that were broken already. He didn't really lead another lecture, did he? What he needed to know was that Jesus cared for him, and he needed to know the truth about his value. So, in the process, Jesus takes this hit to his own reputation, and he chooses connection. Because the crowd, they had labeled Zacchaeus, hadn't they? Jesus, on the other hand, named him. The crowd wanted correction, and Jesus offered presence. And presence did what lectures or pressure never could have ever accomplished. Watch the reaction of the crowd to Zacchaeus in this next section. Verse 6 says, Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. He has gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner, they grumbled. If we think about it for just a minute, I mean, we recognize God has obviously been at work in Zacchaeus leading up to this moment. And it could be said that all these grumbling people in Jericho who were so locked into their offense that Jesus connected with Zacchaeus, well, they missed all of what God was doing and all of his work on that particular day, didn't they? But you know what? I mean, there's a lot of people in life that in the same way we can label them and write them off. No one really thought redemption was possible for a guy like Zacchaeus. And honestly, not even Zacchaeus himself thought that. But we know that Jesus doesn't ever shy away from identifying problems or dealing with challenging individuals. I mean, he affirms what people declare about themselves. Remember the woman who said, "I have no husband"? He said, "You're right, you don't." And other times he identifies things sometimes through his grief, like that was often the way he handled the religious crowd of his day, those who thought they had it all figured out, right? And there were times when he would say, not in this many words, but he expressed, you've got a lot to learn when you choose to live in that self-affirming pride rather than a humble teachability before God. Maybe, these people thought that Jesus should give Zacchaeus a really good talking to, right? About his treacherous behavior. Somebody needs to say something to him. I don't know about you, but I've watched God over and over again draw people to himself and to help them confront what it is that's happening in their lives far better than a wagging finger in their faces could have ever accomplished. So in this case, here's Zacchaeus looking to see Jesus, and it's kind of odd that Jesus is the one who sees him. And when you read the descriptors around this, it shows us his deep desire to encounter Jesus, not just to see him, but he goes out of his way looking to be able to catch a glimpse of him. And he realizes when Jesus sees him, his response, as we see here, is almost over the top. Immediate, but over the top. Watch it in verse 8. It says, "Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, 'I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord. And if I've cheated people on their taxes, I'll give them back 4 times as much.'" Now, this was a pretty extravagant response. The law didn't require anything close to this level of restitution. And it's kind of cool here what Jesus has to say next, because he actually makes a value statement that's easy for us to miss about who Zacchaeus really is. Verse 9 says, Jesus responded, "Salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost." A true son of Abraham. Now, that's what he's been isolated from for such a long time. It may have even been an insult that somebody would have levied his way, like, "You tax collectors, there's no way you are ever considered to be sons of Abraham. You don't belong to our nation anymore." But what an unexpected, incredible day this was for Zacchaeus. I mean, he woke up in the morning under the weight of rejection, and he went to bed that night with a completely renewed life. And to this day, it's pretty amazing to see how forgiveness and value actually changes people. Now, Jesus, as we watch him here and as we study his approach and what he does, he gives us tremendously transferable methods to be able to engage with people, attitudes and actions that are meant to shape our lives and actually see how they can invest in the lives of others. Like he says, we see here how he includes people in his world. I mean, that's what he does. He invites Zacchaeus into his world, and he includes him. And we've already talked this month about how Jesus and his love really helps us to see people when we live in his love. And so what we're seeing here is Jesus seeing Zacchaeus, and he's reaching out when he could have just walked on by. Jesus is moving through Jericho. Maybe he's walking slowly on purpose to pay attention, responding to what God's already doing in the people of Jericho. And I think that's somewhat where our journey can begin, right? Well, what's it look like for us to walk slowly through life, through a room, to listen to the voice of the Spirit as we encounter people? Sometimes it's great because, there are people that you encounter and the connection is easy and it's like, boom, man, this is awesome. And then sometimes some of those connections are a little bit more challenging, aren't they? One of the places we lived, there was this guy who lived up the street, and he was a creepy mess of a guy. And it was far from natural for me to be open with him. God really had to help me, because I would not have walked with him well on my own. He was somebody I would have kept mostly at a distance. But what I discovered as I got to know him and as the Spirit of God prompted me toward him is that I needed him as much as he needed me in my own discipleship journey to know how to include people who were not like me. And Jesus models for us here how to include people in our world. And then he also invests in people here with time and generosity. It's curious to realize, Jesus didn't invest in everyone in Jericho, but he always did that with a purpose. His investments sometimes didn't even make sense to others, like we've seen here even in this passage. Zacchaeus would be on this least likely list. If you're thinking about the disciples, even for that matter, they were kind of a ragtag group of people. They weren't really leadership standouts. It has been argued as people have studied the character of the disciples that Judas may have actually been the sharpest person in the group from a human point of view, and we see how that worked out. But Jesus shared life with them, and he poured into them. You may have heard me say this before, and it's not original with me, that God doesn't call us to fill everyone else up, but he does call us to empty ourselves out. A few years ago, I was privileged to be able to baptize a guy who at one time had been the premier drug dealer in his community. And, he would have been labeled as the least likely in his community to ever discover who Jesus was. And there was a couple of people, and I happened to know who they were, that made some investments in this guy. And when I met him and we started having these conversations, this all kind of came up, and I had the honor of meeting him later on in life, and as the days progressed, he crossed the line of faith and chose to be baptized. And we may not invest all things in a person's life like some of those folks in his community did, but we are called to invest something. And so as a result, there were a number of people who invested in this person's life, and Jesus models for us how to invest in people with time and generosity. And he also invites people to explore godly transformation. It's hard to imagine, that even with Jesus, some people, they walk away. Look at, if you want, in the section just ahead of us in Luke chapter 18, just before where we read, there's a rich man who encounters Jesus and he walks away. And then by contrast here in chapter 19, here's this rich man who is ready and responds. Jesus' invitation caps off the work of God in Zacchaeus' life. Obviously, God has been at work in Zacchaeus before now. His eager response tells us that he was ready for the transformation Jesus would bring. He was looking for a way to see his life change and be transformed. The ministry of Jesus stepped into this space that God was already working on in Zacchaeus. And at some point in our relationships, all the while we're praying and trusting and anticipating a time, There's a window where we share something about the way Jesus has worked in our lives. And I've found when it comes to those conversations, and maybe you have too, that quantity time is so much more valuable than just looking for those quality moments. But as we spend more and more quantity time, it opens the door for those quality conversations. And questions have oftentimes, for me, led the way to the kind of conversation that I long to have. A few helpful, open-ended questions can be better than that loaded-up speech that I always thought I had to have ready about the important points of following Jesus. And too often, I know I've stumbled over trying to share everything. So we end up erring on the side of sharing nothing. And sometimes if we've shared something, maybe we later on go, oh, I forgot to say this, and I should have said that. And honestly, in the middle of all of that, we find ourselves operating as if the whole communication of what we're sharing about Jesus is about us saying the right stuff. But we forget. God's already been at work, like he has with Zacchaeus. We just kind of step in and step out of the process of what he's doing in their lives. And Jesus models how to invite someone here to explore transformation in their lives. Somebody God has already been working on, so they are ready. Now, it's interesting. The Bible doesn't tell us much more about this guy Zacchaeus. Other writings that surround this particular time suggest that he was following Jesus around the time of the resurrection, and he ended up traveling more and more with Peter in his entourage. And his name pops up again as a key leader at the church in Caesarea. Nobody saw Zacchaeus that way until Jesus did. And Jesus, he went beyond labels. There were others who looked right at Zacchaeus, and they missed all of that. So maybe we need to ask ourselves, is there anybody we're writing off or overlooking in our lives? It's pretty easy for us to get life blinders on because there's just so much happening, right? We buzz through life. We get caught up maybe with complaining about things like maybe the people in Jericho did, or we assume that certain people are beyond the reach of God. And then we miss what God wants to do because of the labels that we've attached to them. But he gives us just a simple pattern here to follow. Include people in our world. Invest in people with time and generosity. And invite them to explore his transformation. Jesus models this pattern. So what if, just for a minute, we kind of took our foot off the gas and realized we didn't have to be everything to everyone? What if, just being something to someone is what God is calling us to? To walk a little slower, to see who that may be, to pay attention, to include someone we might normally pass by. Because we can look right at people, right, and still miss what it is that God's doing in them. But Jesus didn't miss Zacchaeus. And because he didn't, a life was changed, a home was transformed, and salvation showed up at the dinner table. And so maybe, just maybe, we could become people who don't just buzz past what God's doing with the people that are right in front of us. That we move beyond nice, beyond ourselves, to follow Jesus' pattern of engaging with people and loving them the way he did. Let me pray for us today. Jesus, we come to you and we acknowledge that in the middle of this moment that there are people that we've overlooked. There's times when we've walked right by folks that maybe we should have paid attention to. And forgive us for that. Oftentimes we just get so caught up in ourselves. And we thank you for the fact that your love as we continue to grow in the love we have for you, it helps us to see people and to love our neighbor the way we love ourselves. And that's really what you're modeling here with Zacchaeus as we think about what it means to include and to invest and to invite. And so we praise you today for the fact that you include us and that you work in our lives and you involve us in what you're doing. And for the people that are around us for whom we may have labeled or overlooked, I pray that you'd help us to walk slowly and pay attention to see what it is that you're up to and how we can be part of it. In your name I pray, and for your sake. Amen.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channels, including Cabin Kids. And if you're catching this on Facebook, you can like or follow us there too. Before you go, please take a moment to like, comment, or share this video so others can enjoy it as well. And if you find yourself in the Kingston area, it would be great to see you and have you join us for an in-person service. And finally, I'll end with this. Please know that you are loved and we are praying for you. Thanks for praying for us too. We'll see you soon.